The theory of evolution is one of the most fundamental ideas in biology, explaining how species change and develop over time through natural processes. While the modern theory is largely attributed to Charles Darwin, its origins and development trace back through centuries of scientific inquiry and observation. Early ideas about evolution before Darwin, various ancient thinkers speculated about the natural world and the origin of species. In the early Greek and Roman periods, philosophers such as Anaximander proposed that life started in the water and eventually moved to land. Similarly, the Roman poet Lucretius suggested that nature itself could produce variety through chance, but these ideas were speculative, without scientific methods to support them. In the 17th and 18th centuries, more structured thought about nature began to emerge. Carl Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist, developed a system for classifying organisms in the 1700s, which indirectly suggested relationships between different species. However, Linnaeus believed in the immutability of species, meaning he thought species did not change over time. The Age of Enlightenment. During the Enlightenment, scientific thinking became more systematic. Georges Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, a French naturalist, was one of the early thinkers to challenge the idea that species were fixed. He suggested that species could change over time due to environmental influences, though he didn't propose a mechanism like natural selection. His ideas began to hint that species might not be permanent and unchanging. Around the same time, Erasmus Darwin, the grandfather of Charles Darwin, also speculated about evolution. In his book Zoonomia, he proposed that all living organisms might have descended from a common ancestor, and he even mentioned the struggle for existence, but without the detailed mechanism of natural selection. Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characteristics, a significant precursor to Darwin, was the French biologist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. In 1809, Lamarck proposed that organisms evolved by acquiring characteristics during their lifetimes that they then passed on to their offspring. For example, he believed that giraffes developed long necks by stretching to reach leaves high in trees, and these longer necks were inherited by their descendants. This idea is known as Lamarckism, or the inheritance of acquired characteristics. While Lamarck's ideas were ultimately proven incorrect, they were crucial in moving the discussion forward. He was one of the first to propose that species evolved over time, and he offered a mechanism, though flawed, for how this change could happen. Geology and evolution. Charles Lyell. By the early 19th century, geology was also playing a crucial role in understanding the history of life on Earth. Charles Lyell, a geologist, published Principles of Geology in the 1830s, which argued that the Earth was much older than previously thought. He championed uniformitarianism, the idea that the same geological processes we see today operated in the past. This suggested that Earth had experienced slow, gradual changes over millions of years, providing a framework for understanding how long-term biological changes, evolution, could occur. Lyell's work deeply influenced Charles Darwin, especially regarding the timescale necessary for species to evolve through natural processes. Charles Darwin and natural selection. The breakthrough moment in evolutionary theory came with Charles Darwin. In 1831, Darwin embarked on a 5-year voyage aboard the HMS Beagle, during which he observed a wide variety of plants, animals, and fossils. His observations, especially those from the Galapagos Islands, where he noticed variations in species like finches, led him to consider that species could change over time. Darwin's key insight was the mechanism of natural selection. By observing that more offspring are produced than can survive, Darwin realized that individuals with traits better suited to their environment were more likely to survive and reproduce. Over time, these advantageous traits would become more common in the population. Darwin did not yet know about genetics, but he proposed that traits were somehow passed on to future generations. In 1859, Darwin published his landmark book, On the Origin of Species, which laid out his theory of evolution by natural selection. The book was revolutionary because it provided a clear, evidence-based explanation for how species could evolve over time without the need for a guiding hand. Alfred Russel Wallace. Around the same time Darwin was developing his theory, the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace independently arrived at the concept of natural selection. Wallace's work in the Malay archipelago led him to similar conclusions about species changing over time. In 1858, Wallace sent Darwin a letter outlining his ideas, prompting Darwin to finally publish his own theory. Darwin and Wallace jointly presented their ideas on natural selection to the Linnean Society of London in 1858. but Darwin's On the Origin of Species the following year became the definitive work on the subject. The modern synthesis in the decades following Darwin's publication, his ideas gained widespread acceptance among scientists, but there was still a missing piece: how traits were passed from one generation to the next. This puzzle was solved with the rediscovery of Gregor Mendel's work on genetics in the early 20th century. Mendel's experiments with pea plants in the mid-1800s had revealed the basic principles of inheritance, showing that traits are passed down in discrete units. When combined with Darwin's theory, Mendel's findings formed the basis of the modern synthesis in the 1930s and 1940s. This was the unification of Darwin's theory of natural selection with Mendelian genetics, creating a comprehensive theory of how evolution operates at both the genetic and population levels. The mechanisms of evolution are processes that drive changes in the genetic composition of populations over time. These mechanisms explain how species adapt to their environments, develop new traits, or even become new species. Here's a breakdown of the primary mechanisms of evolution. 1. Natural selection. Natural selection is the process that Charles Darwin is most famous for. It explains how organisms with traits better suited to their environment are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on those advantageous traits to their offspring. Over time, this leads to an increase in those favorable traits in the population. Key elements of natural selection: variation. Individuals in a population have different traits, and this variation is often genetic. Inheritance. Some of these traits are heritable, meaning they can be passed from parents to offspring. Differential survival. Individuals with advantageous traits are more likely to survive and reproduce. Reproduction. Over time, these advantageous traits become more common in the population. Types of natural selection. Stabilizing selection favors the average individuals in a population and reduces variation. For example, human birth weights are usually within a narrow range because both very low and very high birth weights have higher mortality rates. Directional selection favors one extreme phenotype over others, causing the population to shift in one direction. For example, if a population of birds moves to an area with only large seeds, birds with larger beaks may have an advantage and become more common. Disruptive selection favors both extreme phenotypes over the average. This can lead to a split in the population, and over time, it may result in speciation. 2. Genetic drift. Genetic drift refers to random changes in the frequency of alleles within a population. Unlike natural selection, genetic drift is not driven by any advantage or disadvantage in survival but occurs by chance. Key characteristics: more pronounced in small populations. Genetic drift has a stronger effect in smaller populations where random events can significantly alter allele frequencies. Random fluctuations. Alleles can increase or decrease purely by chance, even if they do not provide a survival advantage. Types of genetic drift. Bottleneck effect. This occurs when a population is drastically reduced in size due to a disaster. The surviving population's gene pool may no longer represent the original population, and some alleles may be lost entirely, leading to reduced genetic diversity. Founder effect. When a small group from a larger population starts a new colony, the genetic makeup of the new colony is likely to reflect that of the initial members. This can lead to significant differences between the new population and the original one. For example, a small population of birds that migrates to a new island may have a genetic makeup that is different from the original mainland population. 3. Gene flow. Gene flow occurs when individuals move between populations and interbreed, introducing new alleles to the gene pool of the population they enter. This can increase genetic variation and potentially introduce advantageous traits to new environments. Effects of gene flow: increasing genetic diversity. By mixing the genetic material between populations, gene flow increases diversity, which can be beneficial for the adaptability of a population. Homogenization. If gene flow occurs frequently, it can reduce differences between populations, making them more genetically similar. For example, if a group of animals migrates to a new region and breeds with the local population, they can introduce new traits that might spread through the population over time. 4. Mutation. A mutation is a change in the DNA sequence of an organism. Mutations are the original source of all genetic variation, providing the raw material for evolution. They can be caused by errors during DNA replication or by environmental factors like radiation. Types of mutations: point mutations, changes in a single nucleotide in the DNA sequence. These can be harmless, beneficial, or harmful, depending on the effect they have on the protein coded by the gene. Insertions, deletions, mutations where nucleotides are added or removed from the sequence, potentially causing larger changes to the gene. Chromosomal mutations, large-scale changes where parts of chromosomes are duplicated, deleted, or rearranged. Role in evolution, beneficial mutations. Occasionally, mutations produce a trait that gives an organism an advantage in its environment. For example, a mutation might lead to resistance to a disease or a better ability to metabolize food. Neutral mutations. Many mutations have no effect on the organism's fitness and are neither selected for nor against. Harmful mutations. Some mutations can reduce an organism's chances of survival and reproduction. These are typically selected against. While most mutations are neutral or harmful, the rare beneficial mutations provide the variation upon which natural selection acts. 5. Sexual selection. Sexual selection is a form of natural selection where individuals with traits that increase their chances of attracting a mate are more likely to reproduce and pass on their genes. Sexual selection often leads to the development of traits that may not necessarily help an organism survive but increase its reproductive success. Types of sexual selection. Intersexual selection. This occurs when one gender chooses mates based on certain traits, like vibrant plumage or elaborate displays. For example, the bright tail feathers of a male peacock may attract females, even though they make the male more vulnerable to predators. Intrasexual selection. This occurs when individuals of the same sex compete with each other for access to mates. Traits that increase success in these competitions, like large antlers or strong muscles, become more common. Over time, sexual selection can lead to the development of highly exaggerated traits or behaviors that may seem impractical from a survival standpoint but are key to reproductive success. 6. Speciation. Speciation is the process by which one species splits into two or more distinct species. It is often the result of the combined effects of natural selection, genetic drift, mutation, and gene flow over long periods. Allopatric speciation. This occurs when a population is geographically separated into two or more isolated groups. Over time, these groups can evolve independently due to different environmental pressures and genetic drift, eventually leading to reproductive isolation and the formation of new species. Sympatric speciation. In sympatric speciation, new species evolve without geographic isolation. This can happen due to changes in behavior, habitat preference, or other factors that lead to reproductive isolation within the same environment. For example, some fish species in the same lake may specialize in different food sources, leading to divergence. 7. Artificial selection. Artificial selection is a process in which humans intentionally select for certain traits in organisms, typically in domesticated animals and plants. This has been used for thousands of years in agriculture and animal breeding. Examples: domesticated animals. Dogs have been bred for specific traits like size, temperament, or coat color, leading to the diverse range of dog breeds we see today. Crops. Plants have been selectively bred for desirable traits such as larger fruits, disease resistance, or faster growth. Unlike natural selection, where the environment selects for traits, artificial selection is guided by human preferences. These mechanisms, natural selection, genetic drift, gene flow, mutation, sexual selection, speciation, and artificial selection, are the driving forces behind the evolution of species. Each mechanism contributes to the diversity of life we observe today, shaping the genetic makeup of populations and leading to the continuous adaptation of organisms to their environments. Comparative anatomy is the study of similarities and differences in the anatomy of different species. It provides critical evidence for the theory of evolution by demonstrating how species with a common ancestor have developed variations in their anatomical structures over time, adapting to different environments and functions. This field explores how different organisms, whether closely related or distantly connected, have evolved similar or different traits based on their evolutionary paths. Homologous structures. One of the key concepts in comparative anatomy is homologous structures, anatomical features that different species share because they inherited them from a common ancestor. Even though these structures may have different functions in different species, they retain a basic anatomical similarity due to their shared evolutionary origin. Examples of homologous structures: forelimbs of vertebrates. One of the classic examples is the forelimb structure of vertebrates like humans, cats, whales, and bats. All of these species have a similar bone arrangement in their limbs: humerus, radius and ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. However, the functions of these limbs vary. Human arms are adapted for grasping, cat legs for walking and running, whale flippers for swimming, and bat wings for flying. Despite their differences in function, the structural similarity of the bones shows that all these species share a common ancestor, which likely had a similar set of bones in its limbs. Over millions of years, these bones adapted to different environments and uses through the process of divergent evolution. Evolutionary explanation: homologous structures support the idea of descent with modification, a key concept in Darwin's theory of evolution. As species diverge from a common ancestor, natural selection acts on variations in these structures, tailoring them to different ecological niches. The underlying similarity in bone structure demonstrates the common origin, while the differences highlight how species have adapted to different ways of life. Analogous structures in contrast to homologous structures. Analogous structures are features in different species that serve similar functions but do not share a common evolutionary origin. Instead, these structures arise from convergent evolution, where species that are not closely related independently evolve similar traits as they adapt to similar environments or ecological roles. Examples of analogous structures: wings of birds and insects. Both birds and insects have wings that enable them to fly, but these wings have very different anatomical origins. Bird wings are modified forelimbs with bones similar to those found in other vertebrates, while insect wings are entirely different structures, evolved from the exoskeleton. These wings are analogous structures because they serve the same function but have different evolutionary origins. The process of natural selection shaped both birds and insects to develop wings because flight provided a similar survival advantage, such as escaping predators or finding food, in their respective environments. Evolutionary explanation: analogous structures provide insight into how different species can develop similar solutions to environmental challenges despite being evolutionarily unrelated. This happens through convergent evolution, where species evolve independently but face similar selective pressures, leading to the development of analogous adaptations. Vestigial structures. Vestigial structures are anatomical features or behaviors that no longer serve a function in the organism but are remnants of traits that were functional in ancestral species. These structures provide evidence of how species have evolved and how some features become obsolete as environments and behaviors change. Examples of vestigial structures: human appendix. In humans, the appendix is a small, vestigial organ with no clear function today. However, in some herbivorous ancestors of humans, the appendix may have played a role in digesting cellulose from plant material. As human diets evolved and became less reliant on tough, fibrous plants, the appendix lost its original function. Whale pelvic bones. Whales have small, vestigial pelvic bones that are not connected to their spine and no longer serve a purpose for walking, as their ancestors once did. These bones are remnants from when the ancestors of whales were land-dwelling mammals with hind limbs. Wings of flightless birds. Birds like ostriches and emus have small, vestigial wings that no longer serve a function for flight. These species evolved to become better suited for running or living in environments where flight was unnecessary, and over time, their wings became reduced in size. Evolutionary explanation: vestigial structures are a window into the evolutionary past. They show how species adapt to changing environments and lifestyles, and how features that were once useful can diminish or disappear entirely. These structures suggest that evolution is a gradual process, where not all traits are completely eliminated but instead may persist in reduced or modified forms. The role of comparative anatomy in evolutionary biology. Comparative anatomy has been one of the strongest sources of evidence for evolution since Darwin's time. By studying the anatomical features of different species, scientists can trace the evolutionary history of organisms and understand how life has diversified over millions of years. Evidence for common descent. Embryological similarities. Many vertebrate species exhibit striking similarities during their embryonic development. For example, human embryos have gill-like structures and tails during certain stages, which reflect our shared ancestry with fish and other vertebrates. Though these features are lost as humans develop, they provide evidence of our evolutionary past. Fossil record. Fossils often reveal transitional forms between major groups of organisms, showing how anatomical features have changed over time. For example, fossil evidence of early whales shows the transition from land-dwelling mammals to fully aquatic whales, with intermediate forms that had both limbs for walking and adaptations for swimming. Adaptive radiation and comparative anatomy. Comparative anatomy is also useful in studying adaptive radiation, a process in which a single species rapidly evolves into multiple different species to fill a variety of ecological niches. This often results in a wide range of anatomical adaptations. Example, Darwin's finches, found in the Galapagos Islands, are a classic example of adaptive radiation. Though they share a common ancestor, the finches evolved different beak shapes and sizes to exploit different food sources, such as seeds, insects, and flowers. Comparative anatomy of the finch's beaks reveals how natural selection drove the divergence of species based on their ecological niches. Comparative anatomy provides critical insight into the evolutionary history of life on Earth. By examining homologous, analogous, and vestigial structures, scientists can trace the evolutionary relationships between species and understand how various organisms have adapted to their environments. These anatomical studies are supported by the fossil record, embryology, and molecular biology, forming a comprehensive picture of how species evolve over time through processes like natural selection, convergent evolution, and adaptive radiation. Embryology, the study of embryos and their development, has provided significant evidence for the theory of evolution. Observations of the similarities between embryos of different species have long intrigued scientists and supported the idea that all animals are related through a common ancestry. Evolutionary theory explains why organisms that appear vastly different as adults can show strikingly similar developmental stages in the embryo, providing clues to their shared evolutionary past. Historical context, embryology and evolution. The study of embryology as evidence for evolution gained prominence in the 19th century, particularly with the work of Charles Darwin and later scientists like Ernst Haeckel. Darwin himself noted embryonic similarities across species in his book On the Origin of Species, stating that early developmental stages often show a closer resemblance between different species than their adult forms do. This observation contributed to the understanding that different species share common ancestors. Ernst Haeckel took this further with his famous theory of recapitulation, which suggested that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, meaning the development of an organism retraces the evolutionary history of its species. While this phrase has since been debunked as a literal explanation, it highlighted the importance of embryological similarities as clues to evolutionary history. How embryology provides evidence for evolution. Similar embryonic stages across species. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for evolution is the observation that embryos of very different species often look remarkably similar at certain stages of development. For example, the embryos of fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals all go through a stage where they have pharyngeal pouches. In fish, these develop into gills, but in mammals, they form parts of the ear and throat. This similarity suggests that fish and mammals share a common ancestor with gills, which were later adapted for different functions. Tail-like structures. Many vertebrate embryos, including human embryos, have tails early in their development. In humans, this tail recedes as development progresses, but in other animals like monkeys or dogs, it forms a functional tail. This shared feature suggests that humans and other tailed animals share a common ancestor with a tail. The similarities in early embryonic stages indicate that different species have inherited their developmental pathways from a common ancestor. Over evolutionary time, these developmental processes were modified, leading to the diversity of life forms we see today. Vestigial structures in embryos. Embryology also reveals vestigial structures, features that appear during development but are not present in the adult form. These features often reflect ancestral traits that have been lost or repurposed as species evolved. Human gill-like structures. Human embryos briefly show pharyngeal arches, which resemble gill structures found in fish. Though they do not become functional gills in humans, they evolve into parts of the jaw, ears, and neck, showing the evolutionary connection to fish ancestors. Human tail. During early development, human embryos possess a tail, which later recedes. This is evidence of an ancestral species that had a functional tail. The presence of these vestigial features in the embryo, even when they are absent or non-functional in the adult, is a strong indication that modern species have evolved from ancestors who had these traits in a functional form. Conserved developmental genes. Another major piece of evidence from embryology is the discovery that many of the genes involved in early development are highly conserved across species, meaning they have changed very little over millions of years of evolution. Hox genes. These are a group of genes that regulate the body plan of animals during embryonic development. Hox genes determine where limbs and other body segments will form. These genes are incredibly similar across a wide range of species, from flies to humans. The fact that such different organisms share the same basic genetic toolkit for development is evidence of their common evolutionary origin. The conservation of these developmental genes across species is a genetic confirmation of the anatomical similarities observed in embryos, underscoring the shared ancestry of diverse organisms. Examples of embryological evidence for evolution: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. One of the best-known examples of embryological similarity is found in vertebrates. Vertebrate embryos, at certain stages, all exhibit a notochord, a flexible rod that supports the body, which is present in all vertebrate embryos and becomes the spine in many species. Pharyngeal pouches, which develop into gills in fish but become parts of the ear and throat in land animals. A tail extending from the spine, which is present in many vertebrate embryos, including humans. These shared features suggest that all vertebrates descended from a common ancestor with these traits. Human embryos and their ancestors. Human embryos go through stages that resemble the embryos of other animals, especially fish and reptiles. For example, gill-like structures form in the human embryo but eventually evolve into parts of the ear and throat rather than becoming functional gills. A tail is present during the early stages of human development and is reduced as the embryo matures. These stages in human embryonic development are not functional, but they reflect the evolutionary history of humans and their vertebrate ancestors, demonstrating that humans share common ancestry with these groups. Bird and reptile embryos. Birds and reptiles share embryological traits that show their evolutionary connection. For example, both groups develop similar structures during their embryonic stages, including limb buds that form in similar patterns. This provides evidence of their shared ancestry and helps explain why birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs. Embryology in the fossil record. Embryology also complements evidence from the fossil record. For example, transitional fossils show how species evolved over time, while embryology shows how developmental processes were conserved or modified as species evolved. Together, these lines of evidence provide a comprehensive picture of how species are related and how they have changed over time. Tetrapod evolution. Fossil evidence of early tetrapods shows the transition from aquatic life to land. Embryology reveals that modern land animals, including humans, still develop structures reminiscent of their aquatic ancestors, like gill-like structures during certain stages of embryonic development. Whale evolution. Fossils of ancient whales show how these creatures evolved from land-dwelling mammals into fully aquatic animals. Embryological studies of modern whales show that whale embryos still develop small hind limb buds early in their development, even though these limbs disappear before birth. This reflects the evolutionary history of whales from their land-dwelling ancestors. Misinterpretations and refinements. Though embryology has provided key evidence for evolution, it has also led to some misconceptions. For example, Ernst Haeckel's recapitulation theory, that the development of an organism directly retraces its evolutionary history, was an oversimplification. While early developmental stages may show similarities between different species, development does not precisely mirror evolutionary history. Instead, embryonic development is shaped by complex interactions between genes and environmental factors, and evolutionary processes modify different stages in different ways. However, despite the limitations of Haeckel's theory, the core idea that embryological similarities reflect shared ancestry remains valid and has been supported by modern evolutionary biology. Embryology provides a wealth of evidence for evolution by revealing how different species share similar developmental stages, reflecting their common ancestry. Through the study of homologous structures in embryos, vestigial traits, and conserved developmental genes like Hox genes, scientists can trace the evolutionary relationships between species. Comparative embryology, alongside genetics and paleontology, continues to deepen our understanding of how life on Earth has evolved. Evolution and human behavior. The study of evolution and human behavior explores how evolutionary processes have shaped not just our physical characteristics but also our psychological traits, social behaviors, and cultural practices. Understanding this connection provides insights into why humans behave the way they do and how our evolutionary past influences our interactions, decision-making, and social structures. 1. Evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology is a field that examines how evolutionary principles such as natural selection and sexual selection influence human behavior and mental processes. The core idea is that many psychological traits, emotions, preferences, and social behaviors are adaptations that have evolved to solve problems faced by our ancestors. Key concepts: adaptation. Behaviors that enhance survival and reproduction become more prevalent over generations. For example, nurturing behaviors in parents enhance the survival of offspring. Innate behaviors. Certain behaviors are considered instinctual and may be hardwired into our biology. For example, fear responses to predators or the tendency to form social bonds are seen as evolved traits that promote survival. 2. Mate selection and reproductive strategies. One of the most significant areas of study in evolutionary psychology is mate selection, which examines how reproductive strategies are influenced by evolutionary pressures. Sexual selection, mate preferences. Different mating strategies have evolved in males and females. Males often compete for access to females, while females tend to be more selective about their mates. This is partly because females invest more in offspring. Indicators of fitness. Women may prefer mates who display traits associated with genetic fitness, such as physical health, strength, and resources. Men may be attracted to traits that signal fertility, such as youth and physical attractiveness. Parental investment theory. This theory posits that the amount of care a parent provides to offspring influences reproductive success. Generally, females tend to invest more time and resources in offspring, while males may have multiple mating opportunities. This difference in investment can lead to varying mating strategies and behaviors, such as jealousy, mate guarding, and parental care, which have evolved to maximize reproductive success. 3. Social behavior and cooperation. Human beings are inherently social animals, and many aspects of our social behavior can be understood through the lens of evolution. Kin selection. Definition. Kin selection is a form of natural selection that favors behaviors that help relatives, as sharing genes increases the likelihood of those genes being passed on. Altruism. Altruistic behaviors often occur among relatives. For example, parents will sacrifice for their children, as doing so increases the chances of their genetic material being passed on. Reciprocal altruism. Definition. This concept suggests that individuals may act altruistically toward non-relatives with the expectation that the favor will be returned in the future. Examples. Helping others within a community can create a network of mutual support, which enhances survival for all involved. This behavior can strengthen social bonds and promote cooperation, which is vital for human societies. 4. Aggression and competition. Understanding aggression through an evolutionary lens can provide insights into human behavior in social contexts. Evolution of aggression. Competition for resources. Aggression may have evolved as a strategy for securing resources, mates, or territory. Individuals who were more aggressive may have had better access to resources and thus higher reproductive success. Intersexual competition. Males may engage in aggressive behavior to compete with other males for female attention. This competition can be observed in various forms, such as physical confrontations or displays of strength. Self-control and social norms. As societies evolved, so did norms regarding aggression. Social structures and laws have developed to mitigate aggression and promote cooperation, reflecting how our understanding of acceptable behavior has evolved through culture. 5. Cultural evolution. Cultural practices are also shaped by evolutionary principles, as culture can influence behavior and social structures. Cultural transmission. Definition. Cultural evolution occurs as behaviors, norms, and practices are passed from one generation to the next through teaching and imitation. Adaptive behavior. Some cultural traits are adaptive and enhance survival, such as developing agricultural practices, which have fundamentally changed human societies. Impact of environment. Cultural practices often reflect adaptations to local environments. For example, societies in colder climates may develop practices centered around food storage and warmth, while those in tropical environments may focus on communal living and resource sharing. 6. Human emotions and evolution. Human emotions can also be examined from an evolutionary perspective. Survival mechanisms. Fear and anxiety. Emotions such as fear evolved as survival mechanisms to protect against threats. Ancestral humans who were more attuned to dangers had a better chance of survival. Social emotions. Emotions like guilt, shame, and empathy foster social cohesion and cooperation within groups. These emotions may have evolved to promote harmonious interactions and reduce conflict among individuals. 7. Modern implications. Understanding the evolutionary basis of human behavior has implications for various fields, including psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Behavioral interventions. Insights from evolutionary psychology can help in developing strategies to address issues such as aggression, mental health, and social dynamics. Public policy and education. Knowledge of how evolutionary factors influence behavior can inform public policy, education, and conflict resolution strategies, fostering better understanding and cooperation in diverse societies. Fossil evidence and transitional forms. Fossil evidence plays a critical role in understanding evolution, serving as a tangible record of life's history on Earth. Fossils provide insight into the changes in species over time, illustrating how organisms have adapted and evolved in response to environmental pressures. One of the most compelling aspects of fossil evidence is the existence of transitional forms, which are fossils that exhibit characteristics of both ancestral and descendant groups. These transitional fossils offer crucial insights into the processes of evolution, demonstrating the gradual changes that occur over time. 1. The significance of fossils. Fossils are the preserved remains or traces of ancient organisms, typically found in sedimentary rock formations. They provide key evidence for several important concepts in evolutionary biology. Chronological record. Fossils allow scientists to establish a timeline of life on Earth, showing how different groups of organisms appeared, thrived, and went extinct. Environmental context. The study of fossilized organisms provides information about the ecosystems and climates of the past, helping researchers understand how these factors influenced evolutionary changes. Comparative anatomy. Fossils enable scientists to examine anatomical features of extinct organisms, allowing for comparisons with modern species and revealing evolutionary relationships. 2. Transitional fossils. Bridging the gap. Transitional fossils are particularly important for illustrating the gradual nature of evolutionary change. They display characteristics that are intermediate between two different groups, providing evidence for common ancestry. Some notable examples include Archaeopteryx, often cited as a quintessential transitional fossil. Archaeopteryx possesses features of both dinosaurs and modern birds. It has feathers and wings, like a bird, but also retains dinosaur-like traits such as teeth and a long tail. This fossil supports the idea that birds evolved from theropod dinosaurs, highlighting the evolutionary link between these two groups. Tiktaalik, discovered in 2004, Tiktaalik is a transitional form between fish and early tetrapods. It possesses both fish-like characteristics and features of land-dwelling animals. This fossil provides insights into the evolutionary transition from aquatic to terrestrial life, illustrating how vertebrates adapted to life on land. Cetaceans. Fossils of ancient whales, such as Pachycetus, Ambulocetus, and Basilosaurus, demonstrate the evolutionary transition from land-dwelling mammals to fully aquatic whales. These transitional forms exhibit a mix of terrestrial and aquatic adaptations, showing how the ancestors of modern whales gradually evolved adaptations for life in water. 3. The role of transitional fossils in evolutionary theory. Transitional fossils bolster the theory of evolution by providing concrete evidence of gradual changes over time. They support the idea that evolution is not a linear process but rather a branching tree of life, where species diverge from common ancestors. Some key points about the role of transitional fossils in evolutionary theory include confirmation of common ancestry. Transitional forms illustrate the shared characteristics between different groups, reinforcing the idea of common ancestry among species. This supports the broader framework of phylogenetics, which studies evolutionary relationships based on genetic and morphological data. Mechanism of natural selection. Transitional fossils provide evidence for the gradual accumulation of adaptations through natural selection. They show how small changes can lead to significant evolutionary developments over time, supporting Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Addressing misconceptions. Transitional fossils counter common misconceptions about evolution, such as the idea that species remain static or that there are missing links. Instead, they demonstrate that evolution is a dynamic process, characterized by continuous change and adaptation. 4. Modern discoveries and future implications. Advancements in technology and methodologies, such as paleogenomics and advanced imaging techniques, continue to enhance our understanding of fossils and their significance in evolution. Ongoing discoveries of transitional fossils provide new insights into evolutionary history and open up questions about the mechanisms driving evolutionary change. In summary, fossil evidence and transitional forms are essential components of our understanding of evolution. They illustrate the gradual changes that occur over time and provide compelling evidence for the interconnectedness of life on Earth. By studying these fossils, scientists can piece together the complex history of life and gain insights into the processes that have shaped the diversity of species we see today. Books about evolution. Evolution Explosion by Darren Naish is an engaging exploration of evolutionary biology, focusing on the remarkable bursts of diversification in the history of life on Earth. The book covers key evolutionary events, emphasizing how both macroevolutionary processes and microevolutionary mechanisms contribute to the complexity of life. Key themes: evolutionary bursts. Naish delves into the concept of evolutionary explosions, periods of rapid diversification that have shaped the tree of life. He highlights significant events, such as the Cambrian explosion, when a wide variety of life forms emerged, as well as the aftermath of mass extinction events, which often set the stage for new adaptive radiations. Fossil evidence. The book utilizes fossil records to trace the evolutionary history of various species, providing readers with concrete examples of how life has changed over millions of years. Naish discusses transitional fossils that demonstrate the gradual changes between major groups, illustrating the mechanisms of evolution in action. Genetic mutations. A central theme in Evolution Explosion is the role of genetic mutations in driving evolution. Naish emphasizes that minor genetic changes, often occurring at the microscopic level, can lead to significant evolutionary adaptations over time. These mutations can influence traits such as color, size, or behavior, impacting an organism's survival and reproductive success. Microevolutionary processes. The book details how microevolutionary processes, such as natural selection, genetic drift, and gene flow, operate on small scales within populations. These processes can result in observable changes within relatively short timeframes, allowing species to adapt to their environments. Interconnectedness of life. Naish underscores the interconnectedness of all life forms, illustrating how genetic, evolutionary, and ecological relationships link different species. He emphasizes that all organisms share a common ancestry, which is evident through comparative anatomy, genetics, and fossil records. Contemporary examples. The book also provides contemporary examples of evolution in action, showing how scientists observe genetic mutations and adaptations in real time. By examining organisms such as bacteria, insects, and plants, Naish demonstrates how evolution is an ongoing process that shapes life today. Conclusion. Evolution Explosion is an accessible and informative read that captures the dynamic nature of evolution, focusing on both large-scale transformations and the critical role of minor genetic mutations. Naish effectively combines paleontological insights with modern evolutionary science, providing readers with a comprehensive understanding of how life on Earth has evolved and continues to adapt through genetic changes. The book serves as a valuable resource for anyone interested in the fascinating mechanisms that drive the diversity of life, making complex concepts engaging and relatable. Here are 7 influential books on evolution and related topics that you might consider adding to your composition. Each provides unique insights into the mechanisms of evolution, the history of life, and the implications of evolutionary theory. 1. The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. Overview. This classic book introduces the concept of the selfish gene, suggesting that genes are the primary unit of selection in evolution. Dawkins argues that behaviors in organisms can be understood through the lens of gene-centered evolution. Key themes. The book discusses concepts like altruism, kin selection, and gene replication, explaining how genetic mutations and variations drive evolutionary change. It emphasizes the role of competition and cooperation at the genetic level, illustrating how small genetic changes can lead to significant evolutionary adaptations. 2. Your Inner Fish by Neil Shubin. Overview. In this engaging book, paleontologist Neil Shubin traces the evolutionary history of humans back to our ancient fish ancestors. He explores the anatomical and genetic connections between humans and other species. Key themes. Shubin highlights the evolutionary transitions that led from fish to land-dwelling animals, providing insights into how minor genetic mutations have shaped human anatomy and physiology. The book effectively demonstrates the deep evolutionary links that connect all life forms. 3. The Evolution of Cooperation by Robert Axelrod. Overview. This book examines the evolution of cooperative behavior among individuals and species, challenging the notion that competition is the only driving force in evolution. Axelrod uses game theory to explore how cooperation can emerge in a competitive environment. Key themes. The book discusses how mutual cooperation can evolve through strategies like tit for tat and how these strategies are relevant in both biological and social contexts. It highlights the importance of understanding cooperation in the broader framework of evolutionary theory. 4. Why Evolution is True by Jerry Coyne Overview. This accessible book presents a comprehensive overview of the evidence supporting the theory of evolution. Coyne discusses various lines of evidence, including fossil records, comparative anatomy, and molecular biology. Key themes. The book emphasizes the robustness of evolutionary theory, illustrating how minor genetic changes over time contribute to speciation and adaptation. It serves as a compelling argument for evolution as the best explanation for the diversity of life on Earth. 5. The Beak of the Finch by Jonathan Weiner Overview. This Pulitzer Prize-winning book follows the research of Peter and Rosemary Grant, who studied finches in the Galapagos Islands over several decades. It provides real-time examples of evolution in action. Key themes. Weiner discusses how environmental changes led to observable adaptations in finch populations, illustrating the role of natural selection and genetic variation. The book highlights the significance of minor genetic mutations and how they can lead to rapid evolutionary changes. 6. Endless Forms Most Beautiful by Sean B. Carroll Overview. This book explores the field of evolutionary developmental biology and how it provides insights into the evolution of complex life forms. Carroll discusses how changes in developmental processes lead to diversity in body plans and structures. Key themes. The book emphasizes the role of genetic regulation and minor mutations in shaping the development of organisms. It connects evolutionary mechanisms with developmental biology, illustrating how small genetic changes can have profound impacts on morphology and evolution. 7. Darwin's Dangerous Idea by Daniel Dennett Overview. This philosophical exploration of Darwinian evolution examines the implications of natural selection for various fields, including biology, psychology, and philosophy. Dennett argues that Darwin's ideas revolutionized our understanding of life and its complexity. Key themes. The book discusses how evolution provides a framework for understanding the development of complex systems, including human cognition and culture. Dennett explores how minor genetic mutations and natural selection contribute to the emergence of complex behaviors and ideas. Conclusion. The study of evolution is a fascinating journey that encompasses a multitude of scientific disciplines, offering insights into the history of life on Earth and the mechanisms that drive the diversity of species. From the foundational principles laid out in Charles Darwin's theories to the modern understanding of genetic mutations and natural selection, the narrative of evolution is rich with complexity and interconnection. At the heart of this exploration lies the concept of fossil evidence and transitional forms. Fossils serve as the tangible remnants of ancient organisms, preserving a chronological record of life and allowing us to trace the evolutionary lineage of various species. Transitional fossils, in particular, provide compelling evidence of the gradual changes that occur as organisms adapt to their environments over time. They illustrate the intricate web of life, showcasing how different groups are interconnected through common ancestry. Books like Evolution Explosion by Darren Naish emphasize the importance of these fossils in understanding the bursts of diversification that have characterized life on Earth. Naish highlights how minor genetic mutations, often observable in microscopic forms, can lead to significant evolutionary adaptations over time. This underscores the dynamic nature of evolution, where even small changes can accumulate and result in profound transformations within species. Moreover, the exploration of comparative anatomy, embryology, and the genetic basis of traits further enriches our understanding of evolution. By examining the similarities and differences among various organisms, scientists can uncover the evolutionary pathways that have led to the complexity of life we see today. Embryological studies reveal striking similarities between species in their developmental stages, suggesting shared ancestry and the influence of evolutionary processes on the development of organisms. The implications of understanding evolution extend beyond academic inquiry. They touch on crucial aspects of contemporary society, including biodiversity conservation, public health, and our approach to climate change. By appreciating the interconnectedness of all life forms and recognizing the impact of environmental changes on species, we can foster a greater sense of responsibility toward our planet and its inhabitants. In addition to the scientific literature, engaging with works by influential authors such as Richard Dawkins, Neil Shubin, Jerry Coyne, and Jonathan Weiner further enhances our comprehension of evolution and its mechanisms. These authors provide diverse perspectives on evolutionary theory, emphasizing the importance of genetic variation, environmental pressures, and the intricate relationships among organisms. As research in evolutionary biology continues to advance, new discoveries will undoubtedly emerge, shedding light on the complexities of life's history. The integration of paleontology, genetics, and ecology will pave the way for deeper insights into the evolutionary processes that shape our world. Ultimately, the study of evolution is a testament to the beauty and complexity of life itself. It invites us to appreciate the intricate web of connections that unite all living organisms, encouraging a sense of wonder and curiosity about the natural world. By understanding our place within this vast tapestry of life, we can better appreciate the delicate balance of ecosystems and the importance of preserving biodiversity for future generations. In conclusion, the exploration of evolution, as illustrated through fossil evidence, transitional forms, and the writings of notable scholars, enriches our understanding of the biological world. It serves as a reminder of the power of nature, the resilience of life, and the profound connections that bind us all. Embracing this knowledge not only deepens our appreciation for the intricacies of life but also inspires us to act with greater mindfulness toward our environment and the myriad species with which we share our planet.